I met Alicia, I don't know, 5 years ago, something like this.
It was for a brick building.
And she
project.
called me to do just a brief consultation on one of the many projects they were working on.
Yeah.
I went out to see the site, and I was just blown away because they have a house that looks like a museum, a carriage barn that they built from scratch that is just an incredible Greek revival reproduction, and they're just amazing people. Todd is town supervisor of the town of West Bloomfield,
And not the chairman of Ontario County.
and now the chairman of the Ontario County Board of Supervisors. I'm not sure what images they have tonight,
Yeah.
but I can tell you as a preservationist, I have been thoroughly impressed with their dedication to the community and to these beautiful buildings that they have rehabilitated. So with that,
Thank you, Bob.
take it away.
Welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here and share our restoration story about our little cobblestone building. Are most of you familiar with this building? Have you been by it in West Bloomfield? You have, yes. It's in the little hamlet of West Bloomfield, right at the end of Route 65, where it intersects with Routes 5 and 20. And it's one of the few commercial-like buildings that we have in our town. But today we're going to take you through a 9-year story of what it took to bring this building from its previous rundown state to its current state, where it's now a little shop and rented. All right. A lot of people ask us why. Why are you doing this? Given the amount of work that has been involved in this project and many of our other projects. I think it comes down to two major points, a couple sub-bullets. We saw this building, which is only 2 doors down from our house. We go by it every day, really. And we'd see it was in disrepair, but knew from its history how significant it was to the town and little village of West Bloomfield. It was the first insurance company building for Ontario County and Livingston County. So for us, we did not want to lose this very important building. And also, it was falling apart, literally. We saw what was happening to this building in the back, and its days were probably numbered before it would collapse. We also didn't want to see it wrapped in vinyl or something that would cause it to lose its historic cobblestone appearance. We also love historic structures and making sure they're preserved for future generations. So.
And also as I think probably all of you know, cobblestones are relatively unique. There are not very many of them within the town, and so doing the right thing kind of by the town and the building to preserve it and try to bring it back to what it once originally was is not only important for the building, but it's important for kind of the look of the town and for that State Route 5 to 20 kind of corridor. So we thought of the building. Alicia has a different version of in her head how she can map something out and what it's going to look like, and she gets full credit for saying, Todd, this is what I think it's going to look like, and I go, I don't know how. And then usually somewhere between 5 and sometimes 20 years later, I turn around and go, oh, that's what you said it was going to look like. And so to that point, creating some kind of an idea of what you think your project is going to look like and thinking about how you map out what you might have to do. And for us, one of our biggest issues has always been, I'm sorry, but it's terrible to be a perfectionist because even if you could hire someone to do it, you often end up doing it yourself over again because you go, I would have just done that little bit more. And so it's a fault of ours that we often say, well, we can just do it ourselves. It might take a little bit longer. So sometimes the scope goes from, maybe it might be 2016, maybe it's 2020, but at least it gets done.
Yeah, so I'm not going to take you through this detailed chart. I just wanted to give you a broad idea of start date, finish date, and some of the major activities that went into our restoration. My background's in program management, planning, project planning, so it's very natural for me to put a Gantt chart together and break this all down by date. But yeah, we bought the building in 2008, and we thought it would be a couple-year project, but 9 years later, we got most of it done. It's still ongoing, and we have things to do. But once we got into demo and repairing some of the major things, we just found that there were so many issues with doors, windows, just repairing the first floor structure and installing new boards. It just dragged out. But I think looking at this chart, the back corner was significant. You're going to see the pictures on what it took to repair that. But things like doors and windows, you think they're pretty simple, but we ended up spending most of our 9 years fixing a lot of the frames, the sashes, back to back to where they were originally. And then a lot of the later years were just spent on finishes, which went a lot more smoothly than some of the structure and initial repair.
And don't worry, the rest of it's all pictures.
Yeah, so now we're on to pictures. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. What's training?
Training.
Yeah.
So being this is a cobblestone building, when we purchased this, I had no idea how to fix stones that were falling out, how to put the mortar in between the stones so it matched what was there. So I engaged Marty Neighbor from Neighborhood Restorations, and he spent an afternoon with me and taught me the basics of creating the mortar that would work with a cobblestone structure, and also matching the mortar detail that's in the building. So we did that early on. I think I've been using that training for a while, and I still have a ways to go to finish this building, but he got us.
So that's training you. It's not training the stones.
Correct. Right. You cannot train those stones. They
We tried putting them there and telling them to stay. They would not.
And just so you don't mention, yeah, it doesn't mention foundation or structural work there. So my assumption is that those are, you put these that you had posts probably that were hand-hewn posts of some kind that supported this, right?
There are posts in the ceiling area.
Yeah.
The entire foundation and walls are just masonry structure. There were some beams in the floor area, but we found that they were not sufficient to really hold things together. So you're going to see some photos, first floor structure, what we did to rebuild the supports that hold the first floor and the second floor.
Those beams go directly into the foundation.
They did,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yes, and we had a creative way to fix what we took out because the pockets that went into the masonry weren't very deep, and we were losing a lot of support in our flooring and ceiling. Any other questions on this chart? I know there's a lot there, but I wanted to give everyone an idea of what was involved. This is what we started with. This is 2008. It was abandoned. Not much paint left. Windows were early and losing paint. Roof was bad. Back corner, I think you saw from that first picture. And the windows were starting to get smashed because there were some kids throwing rocks into it. So we really started with a project that needed work.
So it had been an antique/gift shop for years. It had gone through several iterations of different owners doing different things, trying to get different points of access to the building, different ways to get to the upstairs. Stone buildings are terrible. Any of you live in a cobblestone or stone building? Stone buildings are terrible to heat. Even if the wall is 1.5 feet thick, it's still an R value of 1. So you get things like somebody putting in a concrete and then putting in a wood stove inside with all their antiques, like strange things.
Yeah, so this is what it looked like on the inside. It was a 1980s renovation, drywall, mason, well, a kind of a faux stone wall. Actually, it was a solid stone wall, but didn't go to the outside. And then plywood floor and indoor-outdoor carpeting, and they did have a staircase to the upstairs and a door to the side. This is what the back looked like. It was kind of on the front picture, but due to poor gutter setup, drainage, water was just running down this corner for years and years, and it brought down eventually all of the coins that were stacked up on the corner. Fortunately for us, most of them were on the ground, so we had those to work with.
Could you explain to people what coins are?
Yeah, coins are like corner blocks that are kind of interwoven. You see them on cobblestones. I'm not sure if you don't see them on brick buildings really.
Sometimes you do.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They reinforce the corners.
Yeah, they're the large 1 foot by 3 foot blocks that go on the side and then on the front in a staggered pattern. So
Go back to
Yeah,
the
they might be
prior
on the
picture.
front picture.
Yeah,
They're
go
on
back.
that corner. Thank you.
Yeah.
These are the coins on the corners
Yeah.
there.
and they should be on the back corner as well, and you literally could put your arm through that whole
Yeah.
corner from the inside.
You can go from outside to inside with your arm, and vice versa. So it was starting to go. So this was a little scary for us. We did engage Marty Neighbor again to take a look at it and give us some advice, and you're going to see how we approached this part of the project. So the first thing we dug into, which is always easy and somewhat fun for us, is the demolition. We took down all the modern fabric, probably from 1950s to present. So we took down the drywall on the ceiling, we took drywall on the walls. It revealed some studs that they put in so they could insulate the building and then put a later finish on. You're going to see later that, you know, what we start to look at, there is a lot of original or very early fabric which we leveraged for the restoration. So this is the ceiling coming down. One thing I want to point out is it's kind of like a board and batten. The building has a wood ceiling, kind of decorative, very wide boards. So we started to see those as we took ceiling drywall down. It was in pretty bad shape, a lot of holes, flaking paint, but something we really appreciated about the building. This is just some more demolition to start to expose the layers. You see the drywall, the yellow, tan, there's insulation underneath, there's studs holding the insulation, and then this fireplace or stove with stone backing. So one project that Todd took on was just taking down all that stone. So that was just adhered to the plaster wall.
It's one of those, I think, depending on your level of effort that you want to put into it, sometimes you have to go all the way back to start over or to redo it in our lingo the right way. And while it might have been nice to keep some insulation, the way it was done wasn't really the right approach for the preservation of the building as far as moisture management and movement through the building. And so that kind of just eventually goes back to as Alicia said, sometimes the demo is the fun part, not only because you start to discover what's actually there, but then you can start to map out what you might have to do as far as some of your next steps.
How involved is county in your choices? Do they have any say because this is a historic building? Do they control what you can and can't use? And like in Monroe County, you can't get the new windows that are the same as the old windows. You have to still use the original windows of the house and restore them. Do you have to do that in Livingston, Ontario?
So there's a couple parts to the answer, so that it's sometimes it can be the county and sometimes it can be the town, and it depends whether you've got a historic preservation district and depending on what the codes are of whether it's mandated as far as paint colors and fabric. In this case, the town of West Bloomfield does not have an actual preservation district. In the comprehensive plan, there's kind of an overlay with all the historic buildings at least identified,
So
but not
county
specific.
supersedes anything?
From the county perspective, no, you don't have to follow a very strict guideline as far as preserving any specific parts of like the specific size or style of the window. Our intent has always been to go back to or get as close to the original. So if we were, you'll see later on, like if we're going to remake the front door because the one that's there is wrong,
Right.
remake it out of the right materials in its original size, not just go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy one that you want.
But we don't have to.
I'm rudely inserting myself here to just try to complete the answer to your question and just give some basic information. There's 3 types of historic designation. There's
Right.
local designation, which is a local preservation district like the Village of Pittsford has, Fairport has, Canandaigua, the City of Rochester. That's the one that regulates like replacing windows. Generally, the standards, there's 150 municipalities in New York State that have preservation districts. They all use standards basically that the National Park Service developed in the 1970s, and they're used across the country. It's a consistent federal standard that's used across the United States, and so there's a methodology towards preservation. There's also the state and national registers of historic preservation that are honorary. If a building meets certain criteria for its architectural significance, because it was associated with somebody important like Abraham Lincoln, or because it was representative of a historic trend in American history like transportation, then it might be eligible for the National Register District. The Village of Pittsford is both a National Register District, a state district, and a local district. So I hope that helps.
Yes.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Very
Was that
helpful.
answer the
Yeah,
whole
I get
question?
asked these questions all the time.
Maria had a
That's why I'm
You
asking.
had a question?
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Is there a default anymore that cobblestones as a group, as a class, were considered
In New York
historic?
State, there is a multiple property submission.
Yeah.
So all cobblestone structures in New York State are automatically eligible for National Register listing. To actually be listed, you must do documentation on the building, photograph it, talk a little bit about its style, date, and history. But every cobblestone building in the state is potentially eligible for the National Register.
Okay.
This is on the National Register, by the way.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
It is now. It was not when we started.
Yeah. So we submitted a request and they accepted. So yeah, this is now, the back is all cleared out, staircase is gone, and now we have the structure to work with.
And then the interesting thing in this picture is the line in the ceiling that goes across is kind of when we discovered where the original partition wall was that would have separated, we believe. There's no way to really know, but front of the insurance company and office in the back, so maybe your visitors or whatever separate.
Okay. And this is the side door, and this just gives you an idea of how bad the structure was when we acquired it. Now this is hidden under drywall. I don't know how that door really stayed in place.
Yeah,
frankly.
you couldn't see, you couldn't tell that door was there.
No, you could, it was there, but I don't know how it stayed.
That's a really neat picture.
And yes, that is daylight across the top.
Yeah.
Those 4 little holes.
Okay, so we went open concept. I'm joking, but we also decided that were asking about beams and structure, the ceiling joists were not well secured in their pockets. There was probably an inch overlap in some spots, and so the ceiling was not very well supported, and we did want to make use of the second story space. In fact, they were using the second story space, but we didn't feel the current joists that were there were safe. This is an early beam though. You can see the structure of the cobblestone. Okay, all right, so talk about training. So when we got the building, this is the east side, and much of the mortar was missing from in between the cobblestones. And this particular building has I'll say a window frame-like design around each stone on the east side and west side. It's different in the front. But we've never seen that design before. We didn't know how to approach it. So as I mentioned, I engaged Marty Neighbor. He came by, gave me a recipe to work with, gave me a tutorial on how to approach recreating this little window frame box around every single stone on the cobblestone. So everything that's, I'll say, looks fresh or a little bit lighter than up above, that's new lattice work or window frame work around the stones. It can be very relaxing work as you go along.
One thing to point out, the craftsmanship in old buildings is unique, and in this building in particular, when we started to put levels, you know, in today's digital level and string, the old mortar lines are still like, I'm sorry, but they're dead nuts on level. Like, you couldn't make them more perfect. And they're still like that, dropping a level, plumb bob on the corners. So it's amazing to see the craftsmanship 180, 200 years later, how it stands up to that test of time.
And for this work, and some work I'll show you later, we use strings for a lot just to keep that line straight all the way from back to front. Yes?
Was this just like local people that put this together, or was there a group of cobblestone craftsmen that did houses everywhere? Or,
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I've heard, I don't know it's true, maybe you know Bob or Steve, where the laborers came from. I do think the stones came from local farms. I find exact matches. But laborers, I don't know if they came from the canal and migrated south.
There was some of that. I know in Pittsford, it was Mr. Crump, I'm trying to think of his first name. Samuel Crump. He was an immigrant who came from, I believe, Wales. And the Wiltse and Crump building at the Four Corners, eventually he opened a store and had a forwarding house on the canal, which became a general store combined with the Wiltse operation. But every single cobblestone building that I'm aware of in Pittsford, including many of the houses in the village, if you look behind the foundation plantings, they're frame houses, but they have cobblestone on the foundation. Nearly all of those were built by Samuel Crump.
Interesting.
okay.
Yeah. This is what we were facing with the roof. This was the asphalt that was on there, very worn, ready to go. So Todd did all the roofing on this building. Fortunately, it's a small building, but it did have to be taken down to the wood sheathing, and we put an architectural shingle back on there.
So what you can see in this picture, there's actually asphalt, and there were still some cedar shingles underneath there, so that's why this is skip sheathing, because it was the cedar shingles. We wanted to use the upstairs. We wanted to preserve as much of this as we could and still put something current on top, so I actually put shiplap sheathing on top of this to give it a solid foundation instead of just going and putting plywood on. So we did shiplap so that it mirrored this pretty closely, and so that when you looked from inside up through these gaps, you would still see at least a nicer finish. Yes.
Did you look at wood shingles?
Yeah, we did some on our house. For this building, it was decided not to be worth the cost.
I just want to make a
We
statement
were
here.
worried about the
Yeah.
longevity of them as well,
Yeah.
although I would love them on this building.
Wood shingles, the problem with cedar shingles today is you just can't get the quality where they have the durability that they had in the past. So many house museums, like I know Historic Williamsburg, they've actually shifted to synthetic wood shingles, and that's a standard practice around the nation.
Yeah,
Do that
thank
with
you.
slate too.
Yep.
They do, right,
Yeah.
synthetic slate also.
This is what the second, I'll say, half story looks like. So we did take out any plywood there and started fresh. Something I want to point out, and I can point it out, or Todd can in future photos, but you see a lot of black underneath that beam. We believe this building had a fire, probably in the later part of the 1800s, and we've noticed charring on some of the beams, where the window lintels are, and here it's very black, and the beam is very dark as well. And it might explain the features on the exterior, which look a little newer than maybe an 1841 building would look like in West Bloomfield.
So from the inside, you can see the shiplap sheathing through the old shiplap sheathing. So for the building's sake, the first thing after we started playing around with demo is get a good roof on it, make sure that nothing worse continues to happen to the building. Then we moved to starting to work on that back corner,
Yeah,
trying to
this-
figure out
This
foundationally what to make
This is a
happen.
very daunting and scary part of our project. I think it's probably one of the biggest things we've tried to tackle in all of our building projects. We brought Marty in again for this. We wanted to work with an expert to figure out how to start this. And the first step was look at the current foundation and see if it's adequate to support this building. And what we found was that the current past foundation didn't go very deep. It was probably only this much below grade, so either the original grade was higher, or they just didn't dig very deep to build a foundation for this cobblestone. So what you see here in this picture is us now digging deeper to create a new foundation for the building to better support this corner. So Marty recommended almost a pyramid type shape support for this corner. So we dug down, I think, to 48 inches. That was
Hard clay.
suggested hard clay. It was
Sorry.
all hand dug, but Todd and me. And we scoured our property, which is just 2 doors down, for big stones, and we used a pretty hard mortar on this corner. Again, working with Marty to just shore up and rebuild a foundation. So this goes under the building and then on the outside as well.
One thing that Alicia mentioned too was the cobblestones is a source, local farmers, but we were lucky enough to be friends with some of the local farmers who historically every couple of years have to rock pick their whole field. Some of them put them somewhere, some put them in a nice convenient place. I could take down the road, put a whole bunch of buckets in the back of the car, sort through a whole bunch of cobblestones, bring them back. So they were happy to see the stones eventually getting off their property out of the field, and it was a great source for us to be able to find some bigger ones. Mostly those came from other places more around our house, but the source for many of the new layers were from local fields. And the thing that's interesting there is that I don't know the number, but I would guess that it's at least 6 to 1 of the number of stones that Alicia would go, nope, maybe rotate it, try the other side, because it would have to fit in with the stones next to it and maybe into a hole, but then it had to have the right relative shape to the ones next to it to not be too tall. So if it was, even though the face might be right, if it bulged up on top, then you would not be very happy when you got to the layer above it because the next stone wouldn't fit in. That's separate from working on the foundation and the corner blocks, which is where we are now.
Yeah, so here's the start of the coin sequence that goes up the side of the building. And we were able to kind of figure out what was there originally based on the void size and the stones that we had. So these were just on the ground, the three on the corner. So we started building on that very large foundation, which is now starting to get covered up on the outside. Soon you're going to see some strings, which we put up, there we go, to make sure we were following a very straight line and keeping these stones in the right position. Otherwise our corner could take a turn. I tried to recruit a young helper. He didn't last long on a lot of these projects. But that's our son, and he's not following the restoration preservation path, but we had him help whenever we could. So here we're just going higher, spacing the stones. We put mortar inside of the gaps, and you're going to see soon that we also have to fill in the spaces between the coins and the rest of the building and stonework. So we have to weave that in as well. We'll keep going. Now we're about a third of the way, and we're starting to get to that stone water table. That's kind of in the middle of the picture. We had that piece as well. We did have to go to Honeywick Falls and find some people who didn't need some of their limestone, and we were able to take a few pieces.
As far as they knew.
No, they did. They had fences they were willing to donate, which was really helpful. So some of these pieces were acquired by very nice neighbors.
And we were most interested in finding the right size, but also old. I mean, yes, we could go to a stone yard and have somebody cut us a new stone, but it looks like a new
Yeah.
stone.
And you can see those are newer looking, but they've aged nicely and are fitting in. And you can start to see, go back one time.
Right.
There's a couple new stones next to one of the coins, so that's where we're starting to feather in and make sure there's a good match between all the rows. We'll keep going.
What did you space those with? Because you obviously, for your mortar line, you had to space that somehow. So would you just get a thin stone?
The coins there,
Yeah.
I was putting wood shims just temporarily, and then we were squeezing mortar in as quickly as possible. It was a really dry mortar, so it held up the weight well. There are some tricky spots where we were trying to put wedges in just to hold the stone up
Right. So
long
you had a
enough
mortar line, right.
so that you can squeeze the mortar in there. I'm an unconventional mason in that. I mean, I do use my hands. I think Marty would frown upon that, but I mean, just to get the mortar in tight. I don't like to have any gaps in between my stone and the next stone, so I want a tight
Yeah,
bond.
we would use a variety of shims to get the stone as level as we could, not necessarily trying to make the mortar gap perfect, like consistent, because it had to be right on the two different ends, and that wasn't always the same. And then trying to line it up with the string for the corner, we wanted the corner to be right, and if that meant the mortar joint at the corner was 3/8 and it was a 1/2 inch at the end of the block in where the cobblestones were, it was easier to blend it there than have the corner off.
Right.
So we tried to really worry more about the corner aspect.
Yeah, you can see a little shim under that stone above that water table line. I mean, it was just to prop it up long enough so we could get the, I'll say, drier mortar that's harder into there.
Did you say everything was pretty much level and plumb when you went in there and looked at everything, or it wasn't?
This corner was missing, but the side walls were very plumb.
Okay.
The back wall, which you can't really see in these photos, has an arc.
Right.
And it's a little scary.
We'll definitely boat out of it.
We did bring in a structural engineer to just tell us whether or not we had to worry about that, but it's pretty solid.
So why was, if the problem was the water dispersal,
Yeah.
why did the foundation need to be strengthened if that was addressed?
There really wasn't a foundation at all. I think our concern was over time, what's there might not be enough.
Okay.
So we wanted to make sure we put reinforcement and a deeper foundation, I think, to give us peace of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Why it was so shallow, I don't know. In our house, we have a very deep foundation, other buildings, deep foundation. This in the back did not.
We also erred on the side of caution because the building next to this is now a multiple apartment house that's been converted, and there is somewhere between 3 to 5 feet from the back of the building to where tenants park. And so we wanted to be as stable just from traffic and movement and stuff, so to help the stability.
Here you can see the feathering in of new cobblestones in between the coins. And I tried to find stones that were the exact same, or very close to the ones adjacent, and so that it matched well, and it would have the same mortar design.
So I understand why you put the foundation deeper under the corner, because you needed at least 42 inches or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you take that all the way across the back?
No.
No.
We did that diagonal.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if the picture was clear, but that foundation, that started at the corner, it probably went out about 3 feet at a very broad angle. But the 42 inches was maybe 1.5 feet, if that answers your question.
Yeah.
The other reason why we did not is inside, and you'll see eventually, they had put a cinder block wall inside in the basement. You can fit, but I just barely fit in between the exterior wall and the cinder block wall, so there was at least some additional support in the back.
So that is the entire back wall now, or corner. We did hire Marty Neighbor and his crew to finish probably the last, I was going to say maybe even 5. Todd and I rigged up a pulley system to get these stones up. They're extremely heavy. And we had scaffolding, but to get up to the higher levels, it was not possible for the two of us to do it. So we did hire, and I did the cobblestone piece. But having the coins in place was wonderful, and it's how you start one of these corners. Okay. All right, back to the inside. This is just more demolition. We're now getting into windows, a little bit more plaster recovery. You can see some black up there again. It's just more burn marks from the previous fire. Windows are diagonal. There's a diagonal detail made of brick. Windows are out. So here's where we could see easily what was rotten, what needed to be replaced or repaired. And I don't know if there's, something else I want to point out. The window lintels are wood. And that's probably not normal. It might not have even been original to this building. And I keep going back to this fire. It's possible that the original limestone lintels were damaged, but the door lintel and these 2 windows are made of wood, and they were in very bad condition. So we'll get into, and there's up close, so we'll get into what we did with that a little later. This is a wood beam that spans over the windows, and this is a little charred, but there wasn't much holding the wood lintel in. And,
For example, you can see the pink string, so you can kind of extrapolate to the rows of cobblestones above it that are still original, and you can see how close they are from, the string goes across the whole front of the building to get that sense of, even after time, that they're still in the right spot.
So this is a photo of a new wood lintel that's in place. It was much better secured to the wood beam that was behind it, or that is behind it. And what you're starting to see is tiny little cobblestones getting put back in place that fell out when the old lintel was removed. Even prior to when it was removed, they were falling out. So these gaps are getting filled in above the window to match what was there prior.
What did you do to waterproof over the top of the wood lintel?
Do we put lead?
Lead strips.
Lead strips, okay. Wow.
Lead strips above the lintel, and you can see a little bit poking out on top of the side pilaster of the door. And the wood, we used all the white oak, just not only for hardness, but for longevity.
Yeah, they were very heavy. They are very heavy lintels. They're a massive piece of oak. This is the side, these are the sides of the windows. Missing cobblestones again. Had to dig through our pile of farm collected stones to find the right sizes. Get them stuck back in there. It's very tedious work. It takes a long time to just do a handful of stones. I hope the people who originally built them were able to do it much faster than I can, because it's slow moving.
How many layers of stone is in the wall?
There's a fieldstone wall to start that's in the kind of the core, and it's like a rubble laid, very rough wall.
Okay.
But on the exterior, there's a lot of, I'll say, gaps and staggering of this fieldstone wall, such that the cobbles kind of weave in there. So when you see a cobblestone, it's not a small stone. It's really a long, flat stone, and those are the best stones to find because they can kind of lay on top of each other and they can kind of weave in to a staggered fieldstone wall. And on the interior, you still have that rubble wall, but there's a pretty thick plaster finish. So you got plaster, rubble, cobble. The cobble's just a veneer.
It's a veneer, but it's not a single dimension veneer. It's not like 1 inch deep where the whole thing would peel off. There's some that are 1 inch and some that are 3 that kind of help tie it in.
Yeah.
If you're doing brickwork, you would put a metal tie or something in there.
Yeah. So, yeah, so that's me with my level, trying to weave in tiny stones to fit in where they should. Took me probably all afternoon to do 7 stones.
Well, in this building, in some of the cobblestone books, it's, the highest number of rows per coin. I don't remember, there's one coin where they're tiny and there's like 11 or 12 of them, and usually there's 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So you could say I did a whole row today. Well, if you did 1 row on 12, like you didn't really get very far, but
Yeah.
it's still a whole row.
I think what was difficult about cobblestones in repairing them is not only do you have to get the bottom of the stone in the right spot and the top of the stone in the right spot to match, but you have to get the face in the right position so that they are all looking smooth from the side, and you also have to get them deep enough. So there's almost like 4 criteria that you're trying to match with these stones. Here we have kind of what things are looking like. We have 2 new oak lintels in place. We have repaired window frames, and we repaired the sashes as well. And those are going into place now as well. Floor.
Then we move inside.
We ended up taking out the joists that were there. We wanted something that was a little bit more structurally sound and didn't rely on the shallow pockets that were in the rubble stone foundation. So this was probably later construction, I would say maybe 80s.
They were relatively standard dimensional lumber, not original, and relatively crudely placed into some of the original pockets in the wall, and way too much space. In the end, we're kind of starting to go a little bit, so they had to go.
So here you're looking at the cobblestone with no floor joists. This is in the back, that cement, or pardon me, cinder block, thank you. Cinder block wall that was used to support the flooring.
And then so the wall in the front is underneath where that one slot in the ceiling was, where that center divider wall was. So that was its means of support for that central wall.
Yeah. And when we bought this building, the basement was just filled with water. So we did spend some time pumping and getting that out as well. This was a big pile of dirt that was in the basement. We hand shoveled that out so that we had a smooth floor.
Smooth floor, but also to be able to repoint everything on the inside walls to kind of firm up that.
Yeah, we dug around the back so that we could get mortar in between the rubble stone.
Was there a cistern?
We did not find one. The only thing we found, this building, and we didn't tell you much about the history besides the insurance company, but it was a beauty parlor, I believe around the 50s. And this building has no plumbing, and it still doesn't today. What we learned is that people would bring water in buckets from next door, I guess wash people's hair, rinse it. But we found pipes that went right to the alleyway. And so I think people were just dumping into a sink, which led to a pipe, and it probably contributed to the erosion that we found all along the back wall, but no cistern that we could find. That's me putting stones back and repointing them. I use a soft mortar, mostly sand and lime. Tiny bit of Portland, but...
gloves, so you could do it all by finger.
Well, I try to use tools as much as possible. So we needed a better solution for this floor that's in this cobblestone, and given that the joist pockets, we did not feel were deep enough, we came up with a concept of a floating floor for the building. And we recently, or prior to this, had a new timber frame built in our backyard, just all mortise and tenon joinery, big barn structure. And the contractor we worked with said he'd take a look at creating a timber frame structure to build a floor for us. And this is Rick Lazarus. He's from South Ithaca in Danby area, and his crew. And they took those huge beams and they built a kind of a square grid structure for our floor. And it's held up by posts, and you could probably drive a truck on this floor and it would support it. It's extremely solid, all mortise and tenon with diagonal bracing. And that is our floor solution without having to compromise the walls of the cobblestone. We also had new ceiling joists put in. These are doubled up. We did use pockets here. You can see there's a lot of reinforcement in the border at the ceiling. More charring of black, that is. Just some more plaster removal, a lot of loose plaster. We took anything that was loose down so that we could recreate. And that's just the back.
We doubled up all of the second floor joists, not only so they would fit into the pockets, so they're more the same dimension of original, but because of the span of the building. So really, we were lucky that it kind of served two purposes.
This is something we're experiencing with the building. This is one area that continues to be damp. We do not know how to fix it, but we've lost a lot of cobblestones. This area, we did hire Marty neighbor to come, and he has fixed this since. But it's something we struggle with, just moisture seeping up and damaging the cobbles. You can see the rubble stone behind it too.
The face of the building is like 40 feet or less off of 5 and 20. So speed limit is still 40, so therefore people are still going 55. So road spray, salt, state plowing, etc. has a little bit of wear and tear on the front. And so that's, we think, part of the problem.
But this has mostly been restored, and it needs to be repointed in between the stones. But it is a concern and something we deal with. This is the other side, not as bad, but you lose a lot of the mortar in between the stones and the decoration that goes with it. This is the start of us repairing the front door lintel. Todd made this door from scratch. We wanted something that would look historically accurate, appropriate. And
We had the old pictures too, right? Did
no,
one of them? Did one of them?
they were square. So we just chose had a double arch door for the front. Back to this door, we removed everything that was loose. And this is what remained. It was really bad. You would take out a stone and the dust would just fall around it. We did have, I guess, above a little bit more solid, but I could have been working on that already. I think I did that. So, yeah, we fixed this too. This is the repair of that door. You can see though, even on the outside, all of the cobblestones have just deteriorated. We do not believe this was an original door. I think it was put in probably around the 30s. And they just cut a hole through the building to get this door there.
Didn't they use those a lot by adding an outhouse to that entryway?
I missed the first part.
They use those as an entry to outhouses they built on
That
the
very
outside.
well,
As they're
yeah,
updating.
especially if there was living space or
Right.
personal space in the back of the building. So just more views of what was. So here, the bottom part below the door was rebuilt, reinforced. We dug down, started to put new cobblestones in place, new cobbles along the side. So filled all that in with rubble stone and then matched the cobblestone size along the way. So yeah, that's pretty much filled in. This is an example of the use of strings. So Todd would pull these very tight. We'd line them up with what was there, and then we would follow that line exactly to match the mortar line. So the top's just getting closed in, so 2 levels above the door, and this is not all sealed up.
If you're really picky, you can see that stone trumps wood.
Yeah, in the corner.
And this is the inside of that door, so all filled in. So it's not going to just fall out into the alleyway.
So that's the plaster coating
Yep.
over the,
Yes.
Yep.
So the plaster was weak in some areas and fell off, and it was still bonded in others. So we kept anything that was stable.
right.
And then you'll see I plastered to the old surface to match. We discovered there was an early wall in the middle. It was stone. And it wasn't practical at all for us to rebuild that stone wall. I'd probably still be working on it if we chose to take that path. So we made a wall as thick as a stone wall, but we opted to do a wood frame instead. We were still true to plaster and lath, so we actually did put up all that lath to eventually apply plaster to it.
And it's really like it's 2 walls, because the stone wall would have been, whatever,
Or a foot.
a 1.5 feet thick, so we did a wall here and then another wall there instead of just 2x4s and making a skinnier wall. So to match the arch and the plaster from the original stone wall. And then when we started the demo and looking at the ceiling boards, one of the things that we're lucky enough to work with Jim Turner in Honeyway Falls, that we can have custom knives made. So we took some samples of the ceiling boards and had a custom knife made to match the profile of the original ceiling boards. And you could see in some of the pictures, there were so many segments where they had, let's put a fireplace over here, let's put a wood burner over here, we need a vent over here. There were so many sections where you couldn't even get a board that went front to back that you could kind of save. We've taken them all down and saved all the pieces. They're in our barn, so we still have them. But the ceiling is all new material, and it's kind of unique in that there's a flat board. It's almost like board and batten, but there's a flat board, and then so 2 flat boards make this space, and then the molded board covers the space in between. So it's a lot of material and a lot of boards, but we got the dimensions really right when we started putting them back up and kind of starting in the center and going in either direction. You could put the boards right back in the old plaster, so you could kind of get that profile to go right back into the right spot.
This is the start of the floor. So now that the joists are in, they're resting or integrated into that floating timber frame, we started to lay out floorboards. Through Craigslist, we were able to find a old store in DeRuyter, New York, that was getting rid of their flooring. And this is basswood. It's from an old pharmacy, probably about the same age. And we salvaged we took all of it. We used every single board, I think. But you're going to see this board, or this floor is made up of these black basswood planks. I think we put...
Mostly we splined them, so a lot of times when you take out the old floor, the groove gets damaged or whatever, and instead of making the board smaller, we would usually just cut like the tongue off and then put a slot in 2 matching boards to butt them together that way instead of making the surface of the board any smaller.
We use strings for this too to make sure that our floor didn't waver or deviate to one side versus the other.
I've never heard of the basswood. I thought basswood was very soft.
It's pretty soft. We've oiled it so that if you put a harder finish on it, it might crack, but this has an oil finish. But yeah, I think a lot of wear could damage it over time, but it doesn't get a ton of use, and so far it's held up pretty decent, especially with a tongue oil finish. So you can see the middle of the floor, we're just branching out. The floor had a lot of tar on it. We were able to scrape off most of it. Some of it still remains for character, but it looks like an old floor if you go in there. And here we're just expanding outward even more. That's the floor coming together. We used a lot of clamps to push the boards together. Some of them did have some
Every now and then there's a straight old board, but there's not very many, so you usually have to persuade them a little bit to go back together.
And that's the floor all done. And then I think the next one, yeah. And this is me putting on a tongue oil finish, slightly thinned. Put a couple coats, the leaves soaked in well, but that's the color it turns. It's kind of a honey color. So there's some plastering. So this is that back area, and I do 2-coat plaster, and this is the scratch coat, and I use Structolite and sand, and I put on the first coat about a 1/4 inch below the final surface, and then just start filling in. And this is actually easy because you can take a straight edge and just kind of go down and make sure that you're following the original plaster lines. This is the finish coat going on. So all of this is smooth or matches the original surface. This is me taking on that big wall. Todd made all the mud, which really helps. And then I slap it on. I tried to recruit.
How much time do you have to work that mud?
Pardon me?
How much time did that mud, how long do you have to work that mud? What's the setup time?
With fresh Structolite, I would say a good hour. It's not fast setting at all. And I don't put the second coat on, and I probably let it sit 12 hours or so that it's pretty hard, so that I can get a nice smooth finish on top.
It looks like it was very heavy.
It is. I take a long time.
She's stronger than she looks.
I do tiny batches.
Well,
I think we store, so I'm really appreciating it.
I think the other part of the answer about the length of time is the 2 coats are really different. So the scratch coat that goes on first is, really the idea is it has to be loose enough that it goes through the lath, forms the key on the back, so it's a little more flexible, so there's a little more moisture. If you let it sit for too long before you go do the second coat, moisture just gets sucked out of the second coat, you don't have much time. So it's a little bit of a, how much can you do today, because you got to plan for what you're going to do tomorrow versus do all of one thing and then go back. So.
Were you able to get grant money for all of this?
No, I think that's one of the reasons we do a lot ourselves. It just keeps labor costs low. It builds up our muscles. But this project was not funded through any grants.
You look very tall in these pictures. You look very tall.
Oh.
Was that what you said?
That's the first time anyone's ever told me I look tall.
It's a 6-foot ceiling.
So, over the structuralite and sand, did you use gypsum plaster, lime plaster, or veneer plaster? What did you?
I use, and I still do this today, and I got this recipe from Eastfield. I use structuralite and lime. So
Structuralite and lime?
Lime, 15% lime.
Okay.
Makes it a little more pliable. Talking to Structuralite representatives or customer support, they just recommend Structuralite and then using some plaster that they have on top or finish. But I'm pretty pleased with the Structuralite and lime.
Okay.
It's given good results. What I found now that with putting a really smooth finish, I'll use some kind of what's it called, the easy sand, like something that I can correct.
Yeah.
And say you can't sand this stuff.
No.
Yeah. It just doesn't sand. So this is a picture with finished plaster. Remember that door that was going to fall through? This is it. We found a door at either Reed House or House Parts. So this is an old door for the back, and kind of matches the front door, but there's new plaster. We had trim that matched the little bits that we found in the building, but it's pretty solid now. This is a middle door we put in to divide the front insurance company business area with the back of the house, or the back of the building. This is the new front door that's now in. We had moldings that we thought would look appropriate. And we did put a new staircase in. We did want to take advantage of the second floor. So we had a little winder built. A man named Bill McMahon did the structure for this and the treads. So you can kind of see it taking shape. This is what it looks like coming down. It's made of pine. We put a beadboard underneath it. We found a newel post from House Parts on South Ave, and then Jim Turner made matching ones, newels, to fit at the major corners of the staircase. That's Jim's shop, where they're turning one of the new balusters. Yeah, that's me painting. I do that too. That's more enjoyable. It's easier than plastering. This is what the second floor looks like after we had the new joist put in. We put new pine flooring in, plank flooring. Todd and I installed that. We insulated, and then we put a sheathing board on top. So it's very, a lot of wood up there, natural looking.
One of the things that's interesting, at least in this building, and you can see at the end of the saw there's a beam. That beam is about knee-high off the floor. So in the original structure, that, they're not girts, whatever they are. They went around the whole outside, the front, and then that one and the one in the back. So when you come up the stairs, you have to make sure you know it's there. When the antique store was there, he would have stairs and warning signs or whatever. There's not a lot of room to get over there. But it's one of those quirks of the building. It's kind of like if you want to have the upstairs, and that's where the structure that holds all of the roof trusses in at the top of the wall, that's where it is.
We don't believe the building had livable or working space up here.
Storage.
If that, yeah, I don't even think there was a staircase.
Did you see access from the outside?
No access from the outside, and not really good access from the inside. So it may be a crawl space, but I'm not sure they really used it.
What did you,
Oh, go ahead.
how did you handle ventilation?
Ventilation up there?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's super tight. We didn't put roof vents in the...
There's ventilation at the end of each of the bays.
Yeah, we did leave some.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's proper or official ventilation with, vents you would buy at a store, but...
There's a ridge vent along the top that covers about over 60% of the roof, so there's a ridge vent up at the peak. And then there's some of the bays have openings, and then it's also, the building is not tight, it's not weather tight at all. Not that that's the right way to ventilate it, but really the center ridge vent is the primary vent for that.
So there's, so where the insulation, between the insulation and the roof, is there a air move, those styrofoam things you put so that, no, it's just straight up against
There wasn't really enough room. I mean, they were small around.
Too small.
So there's no V or U stripping going down between the insulation so that you can have the roof plastered?
No, I'm hoping we're not going to pay a price for not having those V's.
There's something above the fiberglass. I don't, we basically hung the fiberglass versus packing it up to the underside of the sheathing.
Well, I noticed it had a U look to it, so I wondered if you had a V strip or a U strip in there.
Some of them we did wire, just to kind of hold it in the right plane, so it's like a 4-inch cavity with 3.5 inches of insulation versus 4 inches shoved into 3 and then squished flat.
It's still not a tight building. I know we have a tenant now, and I don't think her heating bills are the greatest.
Well, so many spaces like this, when I go up and show them, they put it, the roof is in just bad condition because it's touching.
So we wanted to finish this inside with a historic look. We found a historic reproduction paper from Waterhouse wall hangings, and we papered the front part of the building. So now we're getting into finer finishes. Our floors are done, the walls are plastered, back is painted along with the ceiling, and we're now having paper hung in this front room. This is Joe Mauer. We got Joe's name from, Joe, Steve?
I love Joe.
He's wonderful. We got his name probably 20 years ago or more from Landmark Society, and he papered our entire house in West Bloomfield, and fortunately he was still doing a few jobs when we were at this point. We did engage him recently, and he's not papering anymore, but he's such a wonderful man and a great wallpaper, and takes wallpapering to an incredible level. He's a master at what he does.
I've spent my whole life hanging around these guys. When you buy wallpaper, it's not guaranteed unless you lay it out and make sure that every piece matches the next roll. I forget what that's called.
Like a batch or a...
He's the only person in I'm 70 years, I've ever seen do it. And he wouldn't do it unless he could do it.
Yeah, he was wonderful, and not to digress too much, but when he did our house, he would spend probably a half a day just studying the walls, figuring out where to put the seam so that it's just a perfect job. And he did some really creative work in terms of getting this paper to match a certain way, and it looks beautiful. He did a great job. So anyway, we wanted to give Joe some credit. This is the plaque. This is one of the final things we did on the building. This is I believe a marble plaque. It's quite large. It sets in the cobblestones on the outside, and you can see it's highlighting the insurance office and when the building was built. And then underneath, it does have the names of the people I don't know if they started the insurance company or funded it, but they're bigger names in the town, and we have those names. But what happened to this is, like other parts of the building, the wood was just very rotten, decayed. So we had a new oval made for this, and this is where Jim Turner did his magic, and he created this surround that matched the original and fits beautifully, and will last a long time, we hope. So this is Todd and me with the building painted, wallpaper up. We ran this building as an antique shop for about three years. So it was fun to fill it and use it for a while. We now have a renter in there. She runs a little shop service. I'm trying to think, Spirit Spindle Root. Her name's Vanessa Hanks, and she uses this building and she takes great care of it, and has it done very, very nicely. But it pretty much looks the same as this, just with her things instead of our things. But this is kind of a small view of what the inside now looks like. And there it is on the outside, windows done, everything's painted around the roof.
Two other things, I guess, that I would point out. When you think about mortar, I think we had at least 4 and maybe 5 different pucks, because the mortar, when the mortar dries, it changes color. And this mortar was not a consistent color. Like if you just went and said, okay, we're going to mix some sand, your sand could be dirtier or cleaner or whatever. And so we would use different tints, and then you have to set it off to the side, number it, make sure you write down what number 1 was actually made with. So I found that. Put them off to the side and then come back like a week later, then try to take it up and see, is it 1 tablespoon of light puff you have to put in, or 2 or whatever. And just because the day you made it, it looks great, it might not look great a week later. And so we kept those somewhere, but we would like keep them in the building just as like, okay, we went through a lot of different stages.
I think our tenant presented them and said, we found some ancient rocks in the back of your building.
So that part is interesting and important if you're going to be doing, trying to do an accurate representation or restoration for the mortar, like on a cobblestone building. And then this one, as Alicia mentioned, the 2 sides had little like shadow boxes around each stone. In the front, they actually come to a point in between the stone. So you need to mortar it in there and then cut it to a fine point so that it sticks in. So there's a lot of different details that went into this building, kind of with the idea of we're trying to make the building, the original builders, feel like, okay, you can come and, insure whatever you have with us kind of perspective.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, she had a question.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, just curious. So was it always an office building or whatever, non-residential? And then curious, so what does your renter do now, like to use the bathroom?
So first question, yes, it's always been a kind of commercial, non-residential business. And it has no plumbing, and how they ran a pizza shop and a beauty parlor, I have no idea how they managed. But they did. So as far as bathroom, we own the property next door, which is also a commercial type building, and it has a bathroom, and it has a side entrance. So as part of our rental agreement, she has the key and uses that bathroom. It works out fine for her. And
yeah. Well, and to one of the other questions or comments before, this building and the building next to it, which is a brick building, there are pictures of a door in the alleyway so that they had some form of a connection. Not sure what was actually going on in between the two. Sorry.
the first picture might have it, Bob.
So looking at the front of the building and the problem you've had with the rising damp and the cobblestone.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to get rid of that concrete patio in front of the?
We do. We've taken
Oh,
out.
I know where it is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We've taken.
Which one do you want?
Just the one you were on.
That's the old one.
We've taken out this half. And so we've revealed the cobblestone. So now it's, I guess, freed up to the door. We do want to take the rest of the cement out, but it's thick, tough stuff.
That's a big
So
project, right?
we're just timing that with everything else, but I think it would help.
Do you think that it's mostly spray, as Todd suggested, or is it rising damp?
I think it's rising damp.
There's a way to take care of that.
Really, I'd love your input, because it is affecting the wallpaper. It's
Well, they
blowing out the baseboard.
In England, they'll take a saw, cut the narrowest possible groove over the top of that water table,
Okay.
as far back in there as you can cut it. And they'll slip lead or slate. In England, they used to use slate, but they'll slip lead. So now we're stopping it. Now everything below will still be subject to
So
that.
something that's impermeable, it
Yeah.
uses to stop the water
Yeah.
from coming up.
Yeah.
I'd like to try that, because we are desperate. I mean, it does eat into the mortar, it ruins the cobblestones, and then on the inside, it takes up the paper, and it's blowing the woodwork. It's pretty severe, but I don't know where the water's coming from, just besides general moisture and
The English write whole books about rising damp, and I have one you can read.
I would love that.
But didn't they use bluestone, but thinner, not as thin as a regular slate that we think of slate here, it's like from New England, but they use bluestone, but a little bit, usually bluestone. But
Yeah.
thinner than bluestone, but thicker than slate,
Okay.
I think is what they use in England. I'm pretty sure it's
Yeah,
bluestone,
so
not slate.
we do want a
It's-
solution, so
It's much
appreciate any
stronger
input.
bluestone.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I think
The
that's
one upper picture, you can see the door in between the two buildings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
How do you heat?
How are you heating the building, or aren't you?
Yeah.
So when we looked at all the different utilities, and there was electric, so we went with an electric furnace, even though it's not necessarily the most efficient choice. We could have done gas, but then you've got to have somewhere for the moisture to go. So there's a gas furnace in the basement with 2 ducts
There's
in
an
one.
electric furnace. in the
Electric
basement.
furnace with 2 ducts in one return.
We're still debating gas. We go back and forth all
The
the time.
thermostat's in the back, on the wall of the closet in the back, really, but like underneath the steps, so the furnace really feeds more in the front, and so there's at least some circulation that way. We don't keep it really very warm.
We kept it at 50. in
But
the
there's no
winter.
insulation in the
Just
walls other
right.
than the stone itself.
Right. Yeah, there's always this struggle between keeping it warm and adding furring strips and insulation and building it out, or going back to the original look. And we're probably not the most practical when it comes to
Do you know they have
heating
solar
choices.
windows, so you don't have to have big things on your roof or out in your backyard? They do have solar windows.
Solar
And I would
windows.
think on something small like this, it would be relatively inexpensive to have solar windows made. Would you have about 8 windows in here?
Not even.
Four.
We have 4 windows in that whole
Oh.
building.
Oh, just on this, there's none on the other side of the back?
There's two, you can see it on the side there, and then
Yeah.
2 in the front. And there's nothing, there's just alley and flat wall on that.
It looks like there was basement access on the one side in the
It's like
front.
a coal
For
shed,
coal?
so it's a small
Yes.
window.
Yeah, we opened up that window again. It's been blocked off, so we'd like to put a little bit more ventilation into that basement, because it does get very damp. It's dry now, but it would be nice to have a little bit more.
What's the square footage of that property?
Let's see, 900?
It's not even 30 by 40, it's like 28 by.
Yeah, I want to say, maybe it's not even 900, 800 square feet maybe? It's
I'm sorry?
800 square feet maybe, 850?
And the building is almost exactly the lot. There is about a foot on the driveway side. The alleyway is split between that and the building next to it, and there is about 3 feet behind it. So there really isn't even anywhere to do You could maybe put a holding tank if you put water. You just always have to constantly pump up there, as you know where to do any septic.
Yeah, we've really struggled with the plumbing, the lack of plumbing for this building, and it's been a barrier in finding more tenants, possible tenants, but we don't have a place for a septic tank, and
Do you know,
until we do, it'll be a struggle.
what was the little, on that top photo, there's a door that, where did that go? 'Cause,
The one on the right of the building?
I guess, yeah, on the right.
Yeah, that was an alleyway, and they had a little roof between the two buildings. There's a brick general store, and then this one, so there's a little roof. And the door just went into the alley, and I'm not really sure what was on the other end.
What was on the other side?
And what its purpose was, if it was, to go into the back door that was created, I don't know.
Yeah, there was no documentation on where that went. There is not an obvious entrance other than the back door in the back of this building. There is no entrance in the brick building on that side. And there is still the tar line, and you can see where it went down in the back, so it wasn't really very deep as far as it went up, and then it went back.
This picture on the bottom, your left, it came from the Genesee Country Museum. Peter Wisby sent that to me. The Genesee Country Museum was considering moving this building when they were acquiring buildings, but I think given its state, they didn't pursue anything. But that's a picture probably from the early 70s. The building was not healthy then. And so I did talk to a local resident who remembered it being abandoned, and around that time, her and her friends just kind of playing around in there, breaking in. And so it had a hard life, probably 60s into when we got it. Still struggling.
And the building on the east side, is that, I've been by there 1,000 times and I can't remember, is that brick?
It is brick.
And it's, okay.
It is brick.
It was the general store in town. It's a
One that
large
was-
two-story
yeah.
brick with big windows.
And you own that one too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of going through the same process as this one, maybe not as bad.
And we did get this building listed on the National Register of Historic Places, so the process for that was, I guess I would say a little easier than the documentation for our house, kind of to Bob's point about the cobblestones. Like it's not a guarantee, but it's a lot easier to fill out the paperwork and say, okay, there's this, here's the proof that it was built for this reason, and here's kind of like its current state. So that process was a little easier for this building.
Now, is it extremely hot in there in the summertime?
I would say if you have a very, very long hot spell, it'll get hot. But if there are cool evenings and or sporadic cool points, it doesn't get too bad. The stones have a unique way of holding cold or holding heat. And they take a long time to cool down or heat up.
I was just thinking of a selection of vendors that might want to rent the place, because depending on what their wear is, the cold and the heat is kind of...
Yeah, it is a challenge, and we did bring in a portable air conditioner for the summers when it was hot. But because it's so tiny, you can usually figure out a way to manage things on a small scale without making huge infrastructure changes to the building.
We put storm windows on all 4 windows and storm doors on the two.
Oh, those help.
The 2 doors. The 2 doors have a screen insert that you can put in the summertime, so you can take out the glass. And you get a lot of airflow through even just having the 2 doors with those 2 screens open. And to Alicia's point, if you get it to a reasonable temperature during the day, at night as it coming, anybody here remember last time it was like 80 at night here in Rochester? So it cools down a lot, and then if you close everything, it stays pretty cool for a long enough time of the day, and then when it starts to get warm, you can open it up again and have the ventilation. So We never really had, we had soap and stuff in our shop, and we
Yeah,
never had any
occasionally.
issues with that. So.
Really?
Sometimes it would sweat a little bit, and I think that's when we invested in a little portable air conditioner. We wheel it in, put the vent out the window, and it helped keep it manageable. Yeah. Any other questions? Bob?
Could you just give the group just a brief summary of your other accomplishments, the general store and your own home?
Yeah. On top of this, we purchased after this the old general store. You can kind of see edges of it. There it's painted white next to the cobblestone. That building was always a commercial building, and it has 2 apartments upstairs. I tackled, with Todd's help, one of the upstairs apartments, and we're now renovating the downstairs to look like probably a 1900s general store again, and plan to rent that as commercial space. In our house, we spent about 20 years. Oh.
She's being too generous. The building was terrible. It was next to our house. There was a porch, so to get to the 2 apartments, there was a staircase up the outside to a porch that ran the whole length of the building.
And the commercial loading dock.
And a commercial loading dock, steel I-beams with a T, with a little Y to hold up the porch.
This is one of those issues where she saw what
Yeah,
it could be.
those 2, like, forget it. But what eventually happened was the loading dock got cut back, all the metal trusses came out, large wooden posts went in to support the 2nd floor deck for the tenants. The staircase got changed to be a flight, a corner, and a flight down, so much smaller, in a wooden frame stair house 2 stories high, went to cover that staircase with reproduction windows, etc., clapboard, kind of match the right age of that building, but also to match some of the details off of our house, since it's right next to our house, and that's what we look at all the time. So that was that kind of little bit of, it needed something different, and we wanted to have the apartment stay upstairs, and to have the tenants, it's a safer way for them to have a place to store stuff. The stairs are covered, you don't have to worry about ice and all that other stuff.
Yeah, well, and Bob did help us. It was literally a back of the envelope type design, and was real inspiration to pursue something different for that building. But we have a federal era building style in town too, and it took us 20 years to get that one done. We're also pursuing another home in the south, maybe a future retirement, but that we only work on every so often, another historic property. So we're tired, but it's our hobby too. Enjoy it. Well, thank you everyone.